people died. People died.
Oh.
You know, it was awful. And whilst it was a story that people would know because maybe they heard about it on the news or they would see reports about it, and like a legal inquest was like dragging around for years and years, it wasn't until this drama came out that people really understood and they learned the extent of what had happened. And they were, you know, the general public were completely understandably angry, really, really angry. There was this little boy who was from a big family who were Irish Catholics. And there was this little girl in another family whose parents were immigrants from an African country living in a slightly more deprived part of the town. And they were of the Muslim faith. And then the third were actually twins, twin boys, rather than one child. And one of the twins had Down syndrome. So they each, as I said, took it in turns to go to each other's homes. And it's just seeing through their eyes how alike they were.
Hello, lovely people around the world. I hope you had a wonderful week. And I hope you watched the first part of my conversation with Jules. If you haven't, I suggest that you go back because that's where I introduced our wonderful guest and spoke a bit about her projects and what she's done and her experience. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
It is lovely. I'm looking forward to more engaging conversation about your experiences and your background and what you're doing. So we're going to continue with the next question. Let's dive right into it. That's interesting for me is that you've done major work in the UK and also in the US. But let me see if I understand correctly. The work you did in the US was for a UK audience?
So I've done a bit of both. So yes, I've done predominantly work in the US for a British audience.
Okay.
I have also done projects, a recent project, which is in America for an American network.
Okay, so even though both these countries, the UK and America, United States, they're both English speaking, but still the cultures are quite different. They may seem to be similar, the Western world, but one is European and one is American, and those are two very, very different cultures. So how do you find the cultures meshing in, and how do you work and overcome cultural barriers to come up with a project that may appeal globally?
Yes, so you very much do have to go on almost like a crash course of figuring things out in the country that you're trying to, you know, create the project for. And actually, this stems back to kind of one of the things that I love about what I do, which is the education side of things. Right? It's making programs that can educate viewers. But actually, for those of us who work in the industry, education is something that we see day in and day out. Education in this regard isn't about what qualifications you have. It's about the skills you're picking up, but also it's about the worlds, the communities, the areas, the industries, all of the different things that you're looking into, that you're researching first and foremost for the project that you're working on. And I love the fact that I mean, honestly, you'd be surprised about the different areas that I've become a temporary expert in, and then you move on to the next thing. And that's kind of what you do. You just sort of, okay, you get your kind of little learning cap on, and you speak to people. You know, that's how the best way to kind of understand an area that you know is completely unfamiliar to you, or that is entirely new, is by speaking to the people who know most about it. So that's kind of the approach that I would normally take. Is if I'm doing a project, if it's in an area that I'm not familiar with, if I'm looking at a culture again that I don't know much about, I'm going to start by speaking to the people who are part of that. And that's what you do as storytellers, as program makers. You know, every project we work on, we want to ensure that we're doing the story justice and that we're telling it accurately. So we go to the source essentially. And in terms of looking at a global connection, I mean, some of these subject matters are universal. These are looking at things that might be about family life, parenting, relationships, religion, faith. I think these are all topics that no matter what country you're from, no matter what language you speak, everyone can relate to or understand it to a certain degree. You know, they're all universal topics. And so I think they despite cultural nuances and differences, they can still appeal to everybody.
Great. Do you cast your people or crew from the locality where you're shooting, or do you take your crew with you from the UK?
It really depends on what the project is. So for the series that we were making for the British audience, it was a pre-existing program that we had already made in the UK. So we were already a core team of Brits. So we went out there, we knew our program. Again, it was presented by a well-known documentary filmmaker, presenter. She's on camera. And so we went and we filmed it over there. But for the American network, when it comes to an idea that we have, that a British production company has, but you need to film it over in the States and it's for an American audience, it's really important that you have a blend of the two. You know, it's important that you have people as part of the production team who actually really do understand what it's like on the ground, who knows what it's like living in that country. And so you might have some people who come from the UK, but you would also have people who are from America, because they'll have a knowledge that, you know, we just simply won't have.
Do you have, well, not you personally, but anyone in your crew from the UK, have you ever had any issues working with people in the US in terms of not understanding each other or each other's way of doing things? Or
that's not something that I've experienced before. No.
Okay, so that it means that the two cultures get to work together quite naturally because of what you said, by going to the source and finding how to do things. That's wonderful. Jules, out of all these projects that you've done, is there one that you favor the most that you could tell us about and tell us why you favor that one the most? If there is one.
Oh yes, I'd say that maybe there's two, but there was a series that I made a few years ago, actually, and I was an assistant producer at the time, and it was a documentary series that was mainly focused on children, young children, sort of 7, 8, 9 years old. And the premise of the show was to focus the entire episode in one particular little community somewhere in the UK. The idea being that you could meet the viewer 3 different families who literally live a stone's throw away from each other, but are from completely different backgrounds and therefore probably don't even speak to each other. So they might be neighbors, but because one maybe goes to that school, and one maybe lives in the big house, and the third one maybe has a very different religion, they would ordinarily never mix. They would never meet.
You mean the children would never mix, or
Yes.
the families?
The families and the children.
Really? Even though they were neighbors, like they don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It kind of comes from this idea that we don't really talk to our neighbors anymore. Most people, a lot of people, don't necessarily talk to their neighbors in the same way that maybe decades ago people would. Communities were much closer then than they are now. People are much more disconnected. They're on their phones, they're watching TV, they're not out and about talking to their neighbors. So we thought, well, what if we took 3 families, focusing on the children, and they got to go on play dates with each other at each other's homes?
So these are 3 kids for totally different backgrounds.
Exactly.
Okay.
And if they took it in turns to go to a play date at each other's home, we'd get to see what they experience and what they learn. Okay. So we rigged the houses with cameras in each of these 3 different homes.
So really it's reality TV now we're talking about.
It's kind of, I think we wouldn't call it reality here. We would say it's a documentary series.
Oh, you call it a documentary still?
This would be a documentary because reality is heavily produced. Heavily.
Even though it's supposed to be reality.
Even though it's just reality. So that's why we wouldn't call it reality. This was very much a case of hey, yeah, we're gonna construct these play dates, but ultimately the children will do what they do, and yeah,
They'll direct themselves.
yeah, well, a little bit of producing in terms of we'll make sure that they, have a meal and that there's an activity that they can do. But ultimately, it's down to them. And we're watching, we're seeing how they interact with each other. And the thing is, there was this one episode, and it was such a lovely and just so authentic. This is the kind of program that is made for families to sit and watch together, right? But you saw how there was this little boy who was from a big family who were Irish Catholics. And there was this little girl in another family whose parents were immigrants from an African country living in a slightly more deprived part of the town. And they were of the Muslim faith. And then the third were actually twin boys, rather than one child. And one of the twins had Down syndrome. So they each, as I said, took it in turns to go to each other's homes. And it's just seeing through their eyes, innocent little eyes who haven't, picked up bad habits or being prejudiced by certain things as they get older. We're just able to see how alike they were, right? How this conversation between this little boy who's a Catholic and this little girl who's a Muslim, and he asks her, well, what religion are you? And she says she's a Muslim. And he says, well, what's that? And he said, well, she said, well, I just believe in God and that we're all the same. And then his response is kind of like me then. And she said, yeah. And then they just go off and they, skip down the garden. I mean, it was just such a sweet little, comment that kind of, we were able just to show it like in all its innocence and just pure unfiltered joy, these children looking at each other and seeing how alike they were. And it's just the kind of thing, it's just one of those heartwarming programs that people just love to enjoy because the children are sweet. You get to see other people's homes, and and it's funny as well because they're it's just so all these funny moments. But within that, there are these just very subtle but important messages, which is we're all the same. Like if the kids can see that we're the same, and the little boy with Down syndrome, they just didn't even recognize that he was different to them.
That is so beautiful. Well, those children, the thing is, though, they haven't come into society quite yet. So they haven't been polluted with these ideas of people being different and one group of people being more superior to other groups of people. It's wonderful. I could listen to your stories from your projects forever. That's wonderful. And did you stay in touch with the families afterwards?
I did for a little bit, actually, because the following year, because it takes such a long time to make these programs, it was after we were promoting the show, the BBC. We didn't actually make it for the BBC. We made it for another channel 4, but they wanted to invite the families for an interview at their studios. So I went with all the families, and they had a great day out in the studio and got to be on the news and be interviewed by the presenters. And so we did stay in touch for a little while, actually. And it's one of those things where they get to experience, and it's kind of a once in a lifetime kind of experience for these children.
So the families also adopted the diversity, not just the children, also the families. Did you have to contact several families to get these families to agree, or was it easy to just pick a family and get it done?
It's never easy. Do you know,
No.
it's never easy when you're making something for the first time, right? If you're making a brand new series, if you're making a show that's never been made before, whatever it is, it's always difficult. When you're on to series 2, then it's easier because then you've got something to show people and say, look, this is a show.
It's the fear of unknown, right?
Fear of the unknown. But when it's the first series, and I have a lot of experience working on first time projects, they don't understand initially, or what's your intention and what's the, what's it going to be like? What's the tone of the show? And something like this we knew from the beginning, it's warm, it's well-intentioned, we want it to be about the children. So we would a lot of work into firstly looking at, well, where in the UK do we want each episode to be based in. And then it was a case of finding families. So for something like that, you would go and visit each place and you'd be knocking on doors, you'd be handing out leaflets. Back in the office, you'll be calling up all the local, schools and, the local drama clubs and after school clubs. And you're like, we're doing this program. So yeah, that's the kind of program where there's a kind of big kind of casting outreach, we would call it.
How many episodes did you make?
We made 3. We made 3 only. Yeah.
I've noticed that at the UK, when they make a series, it's always a small number of episodes. It's not mass produced.
Yeah, that's right. It's not. And especially now, because the industry is going through such a tough time and networks are competing against streamers, they're competing against social media platforms.
Right.
Advertising revenue just isn't there at the moment, because advertisers are going online.
Right.
So budgets are getting tighter and tighter. And so networks have even less money now to give production companies to make programs, which is why, it's so tough. And it's an industry that's built on freelancers. Most people who work in the industry are freelancers, and it's tough going from job to job to job and not knowing what's coming next. So it's tough, and even more reason why, instead of 6 episodes, we're going down to 3. Like we don't have the budget to make 6 anymore. It's that kind of thing as well. But hopefully things will bounce back.
I'm sure it does. It will, just like it always has. I know you're working on a project right now, which you cannot talk about.
I'm working on a project right now, which I can't talk about. I can tell you behind the scenes. But yeah, there's been a few things that I've sort of like top secret. The project that I'm working on at the moment, it's one of these strange ones where I'm calling a lot of people and I'm asking them to sign an NDA before I can tell them anything about it. So
they have to sign it blindly, not knowing.
Yeah, we'll kind of give them a little hint, or we'll give them just the context of, why I want to speak to them. But yeah, they're just signing it blindly.
That's okay. I'm sure once it's finished and aired and it's all public, then maybe we'll have you over again.
That's it. I can tell you about it. Exactly.
That'll be an excuse to bring you back, Jules.
Thank you.
Jules, we talked about social media briefly and the fact that there are so many individuals across the globe who have their own programming, just like this. A lot of these people want to create content that is impactful, that is useful. We know there is the other side of the spectrum where there's a lot of hate speech and podcasters or content providers who are creating more and more and more division by glorifying one aspect of something and, totally destroying everything else. And I guess that sort of hate speech is become popular because it's shocking and it attracts a viewership. It's programs that want to do the opposite, that want to talk about love and unity and inclusivity and all of that are having to struggle to find their niche. Now, I'm not talking about myself because obviously I'm not a young woman, but you being such a young woman with such great experience, what do you recommend other young folks who want to start out and who are interested in content that is impactful?
Yeah, it's kind of exactly what you said. There's a lot out there that it's just very difficult to cut through the noise. What I would say is to anyone who's really passionate about creating their own content and, especially if it's content that they know has very positive intentions, that's got really positive messages behind it, like unity, like inclusion, then to persevere. The whole kind of social media sphere is both a blessing and a curse, but there are good things that they can take out of it. Certainly in terms of the immediacy of putting out your ideas, you're not going to get that anywhere else than you will with social media. I mean, I could certainly say, broadcast television, more traditional aspects of the media world, they're always looking for ideas, but it's just a much slower process. But there's no reason why any individual couldn't just approach a network or a channel. You don't have to be part of a production company. I think most people would assume that you'd have to already be working in the industry. You have to already be working with a production company in order just to submit an idea to, say, the BBC. Whereas actually, if you go on their website, you'll see that, all the commissioners' names and their contact details are there. So there's nothing to stop you from making that approach. If you've got an idea and you feel passionate about it, then
So you can find an email address and just shoot
find an
out an
email,
email?
yeah, the names, heads of departments. So go direct to the source, or you can kind of find a production company that you think shares your values, that you think actually with their backing and their support, if I can get they're interested in my idea, then you do often see production companies collaborating with people who do take their ideas to them. That's another approach, but I would just say it's just longer. And as I mentioned, the industry is really tough right now. If we're talking about right now, if young people or anyone wants to just make content that's positive, then certainly your quickest and easiest route is doing that on social media. But that's not to say that you can't explore other avenues as well.
Yeah, I guess start with the social media. It's free. All you need is a camera or a phone.
Yeah.
And yes, and then persevere. I like the word that you used, persevere. I guess like anything else, success comes with perseverance. So,
Absolutely.
Jules, before we say goodbye to everyone, do you want to share anything special with our audience?
Ooh, anything special?
I don't know, any words of wisdom, any message you want to put out there in the universe, any shout outs to anyone?
Yeah. I don't think I've got anything that's particularly wise. No, I would just say that as tough as it is, as I said, is really difficult, and a lot of people are struggling. But we still, as an industry, you always want to hear new voices. What we do has weight, it has a responsibility. Television is one of those things that people think is really kind of superficial, or people might think it's really exciting or it's really glamorous, or they might have certain perceptions of what it's all about, whereas actually, it's a job.
Hard work,
It's hard work.
of
Yes, you get
course.
to be
Yeah.
creative. Yes, you get to do fun things. Yes, I have days where my job is to sit and literally watch television, and yes, I love it, but it is hard work. And I would say that something I've seen in the UK, even just in the last year or so, is that television and the media can truly generate social reform. I mean, it's happened. We've seen it. There've been a couple of examples of it. Didn't have anything to do with me, but there was a drama that came out about a year ago that was about the post office scandal. So the post office, it's an institution. It's the company that ensures that we receive our mail or our post, our letters, right? And it's kind of like a franchise. There'll be men and women up and down the country who will have a physical shop, a post office. And long story short, this happened a couple of decades ago, but there was a new IT system that kept glitching, and it would show that these post offices were losing money. Okay. And so the post office would say, well, you've got to pay us this money. The system here shows that £15,000 has been missing from your accounts. Well, you're responsible. So you had all these businesses paying all of this money that they thought that they were responsible for because
And
the
they
post
weren't.
office because the post office was insistent that their IT system was infallible, that it was absolutely accurate, that there was nothing wrong. And they were telling each and every person that they're the only one who've had this experience. Hundreds and hundreds of people were experiencing this. And each time someone at the post office was saying, but you're the only person that it's happened to. And so this drama, it was a drama series with some well-known British actors involved, just explored, told the story of what happened to these men and women and the severity that this injustice had on their lives. I mean, people were thrown in prison, because they didn't have the money to pay for it,
To
or because
pay
they were
for
accused
it.
of fraud. This was fraudulent what you were doing. People died. People died
Oh,
from it. It was awful. And whilst it was a story that people would know because maybe they heard about it on the news or they would see reports about it, and like a legal inquest was like dragging around for years and years, it wasn't until this drama came out that people really understood and they learned the extent of what had happened. And they were, the general public were completely understandably angry, really, really angry. And it just goes to show how something like a TV show can really impact the country. And there were petitions, there were calls for legal court cases, inquiries to be had into the post office, which have been happening, compensation. I mean, it was like a political agenda. The whole country was talking about it and backing these victims who were completely misled at the heart of the story, and all from a drama series. I mean, it's just one of those things where you think
the impact, the influence of the arts is so grand. It's
it
so
really
good
is.
because it touches the heart, right? It breaks down the information to something that the heart can absorb. So that's wonderful. I'm glad you talked about that because it shows the impact of what the TV or film or theater or music or any sort of art can do. All right, Jules, I could talk to you for hours more. I would love to hear about every bit of all of your project. Unfortunately, though, our time has come to an end, so we have to say goodbye. I hope to be able to speak with you again soon, but for now, we're going to say goodbye to our lovely audience. Please join us again. Next time we will be speaking with an independent filmmaker whose work is also inspiring. Another woman, Anne Shin, will be with us next time to discuss her films and what motivates her in creating the kind of work that moves the hearts of people around the globe, regardless of background. We are all one family. Thank you, Jules, and hope to see you again soon.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and all the best to you for your present project as well as the future ones. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye, Jules.
See you.
From scattered fragments to global unity, healing our world together.
Found his wife and child in Iraq. We had actually followed him going back to Iraq looking for them. But he has sisters and brothers in Vancouver who have been very good and taking care of him.
He didn't find the child and the mom and the wife?
There were child soldiers, Iranian
Yes.
children that were sent to war. And so Zahed was one of them. And Najah was an Iraqi soldier who was a bit older. He was, 18, but he was still a teenager himself.
Of course.
And Zahed found Najah in a bunker, injured amongst his other comrades who were dead. And Zahed risked his own life to get medical supplies to keep Najah alive, even though he was ordered to kill any survivors that he found.